The FBI raided Jeffrey Epstein's private island days after August 10, 2019. That is the same day he was found dead in his federal prison cell. By then, his hard drives had been wiped, his safe had been emptied, and dozens of files were missing. The official cause of death was suicide. But according to a Rasmussen Reports poll, only 29% of Americans believed it. The question isn't whether powerful people wanted Epstein silenced. Court documents show his black book contained over 1,000 names, including presidents, prime ministers, and billionaires. The question is why every single safeguard designed to prevent his death failed simultaneously on the same night. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on July 6, 2019, on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors. The evidence against him was overwhelming. They included flight logs, witness testimony, and financial records that spanned decades. If convicted, he faced up to 45 years in prison. At 66 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. On July 23, 18 days after his arrest, guards found Jeffrey Epstein semi-conscious in his cell, with marks around his neck. Prison officials immediately placed him on suicide watch, the highest level of protection in the federal system. Suicide watch means constant observation, removal of all potentially dangerous items, and placement in a special cell designed to prevent self-harm. But here is where the official timeline breaks down. Despite this clear suicide attempt, prison officials removed Epstein from suicide watch in late July. The prison's chief psychologist approved the removal, yet questions remain about why the decision was made and who authorized it. Why would federal officials remove the most high-profile prisoner in America from suicide watch just weeks before his death? Especially after he had already attempted suicide once? The night of August 9th into August 10th is when every protection system failed. Epstein was supposed to be checked every 30 minutes by 2 guards. Both guards, Michael Thomas and Tova Noel, were later charged with conspiracy and record falsification. Those charges were ultimately dropped. They falsified records claiming they performed the required checks when they had not. The surveillance cameras that should have recorded Epstein's final hours failed. Multiple cameras in the area where Epstein was housed were not working. The FBI later recovered some footage, but officials have never released it publicly or explained what the working cameras actually showed. Epstein's cellmate was transferred out earlier that week, leaving him alone despite federal guidelines that require high-profile inmates to have cellmates for safety. The transfer occurred without documented approval from senior officials. But the most disturbing detail came from court filings months later. In his final hours, Epstein performed a Google search. The contents of that search have never been publicly revealed. What was Jeffrey Epstein looking for in the hours before his death? Who was he trying to contact? The search contents remain classified. Forensic pathologist Michael Baden was hired by Epstein's family to observe the autopsy. Baden had performed more than 20,000 autopsies during his career, including investigations into the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr. and the review of evidence in the JFK assassination. After examining Epstein's body, Baden announced the evidence was more consistent with homicidal strangulation than suicidal hanging. The specific injuries Baden identified were unusual for hanging deaths, but common in cases of strangulation. He found multiple fractures in the neck bones, particularly the hyoid bone. Baden said fractures of that bone are extremely rare in suicidal hanging, but common when pressure is applied by another person. The official medical examiner disagreed and maintained the suicide ruling. But Baden's findings raised questions that have never been adequately answered. Why would an experienced forensic pathologist risk his reputation by making public statements unless he found compelling evidence? The investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's death revealed institutional failures at every level. The Department of Justice Inspector General spent 4 years investigating and released a damning report in June 2023. The report documented negligence, misconduct, and outright job performance failures by prison staff. Guards were browsing the internet and shopping online instead of monitoring prisoners. Supervisors slept during their shifts. Required equipment checks had not been performed for months. The report said the Metropolitan Correctional Center was so poorly managed that multiple security failures occurring at the same time were not just possible, they were inevitable. But this explanation raises another question. If the prison was known to be failing, why was the most important witness in a case involving some of the world's most powerful people housed there? Why was he not transferred to a more secure facility? The timing of Epstein's death cannot be separated from what was about to be revealed. One day before he was found dead, nearly 2,000 pages of court documents were unsealed in a civil case involving Ghislaine Maxwell. The documents contained detailed allegations about Epstein's operations, and they named multiple high-profile individuals. More documents were scheduled to be released in the coming weeks. Epstein's cooperation with federal investigators could have led to charges against others in his network. His death ended that possibility permanently. Flight logs from Jeffrey Epstein's private jet showed hundreds of trips, carrying politicians, celebrities, and business leaders to his private island. Court filings revealed that many of these individuals had been recorded on hidden cameras placed throughout Epstein's properties. What happened to those recordings? Who had access to them before Epstein's death? These questions remain unanswered because the only person who could provide answers was Jeffrey Epstein. The beneficiaries of Epstein's silence were clear. Anyone who had participated in or witnessed illegal activities at his properties faced potential criminal charges if he cooperated with authorities. Anyone who had business dealings that could be scrutinized faced financial and reputational destruction. The list of people who needed Epstein to remain quiet was extensive and powerful. By November 2019, polling showed that Americans who believed Epstein was murdered outnumbered those who believed he committed suicide by 3-1. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became so widespread it appeared everywhere, from sporting events to congressional hearings. The phrase represents something larger than skepticism about one death. It reflects a complete breakdown in public trust in official narratives, particularly when those narratives protect powerful interests. When institutions repeatedly fail to provide credible explanations, people stop believing them entirely. The Epstein case demonstrates how institutional failures can appear coordinated, even when they are not. When every safeguard fails simultaneously, when evidence disappears, when questions go unanswered, the result looks identical to a deliberate cover-up regardless of intent. What makes the Epstein case particularly damaging to public trust is the pattern of protection he received throughout his life. His 2008 conviction in Florida resulted in a sweetheart plea deal that allowed him to serve just 13 months in county jail with work release privileges. The deal was negotiated by prosecutors who later admitted they were told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. This history of protection makes his death in federal custody appear consistent with a larger pattern rather than an isolated failure. When someone has been protected by powerful interests for decades, their sudden death in custody while facing serious charges appears suspicious regardless of the official explanation. The consequences extend beyond one case. The failure to adequately investigate Epstein's death and to prosecute others in his network has damaged faith in the justice system's ability to hold powerful people accountable. When justice fails at this level, it sends a message about who the system actually serves. The missing evidence in the Epstein case continues to fuel speculation. The wiped hard drives, the missing files, the classified Google search, the malfunctioning cameras. Each missing piece of evidence represents another unanswered question about what really happened and who might have been involved. What we are left with is a case where every official explanation requires believing in an extraordinary series of coincidences. That guards fell asleep at the exact moment cameras malfunctioned, while the most important witness in a case involving the world's elite was left alone in his cell after being removed from suicide watch for undocumented reasons. The American public's rejection of the official suicide narrative reflects something deeper than conspiracy thinking. It reflects a recognition that when powerful interests are threatened, institutional failures tend to happen in very convenient ways. The Epstein case has become a symbol of this pattern. which is why nobody believes he killed himself. What do you think really happened that night? Drop it in the comments. The documented failures we found in this investigation appear in other cases involving powerful networks and institutional accountability. If you want to see what other buried records reveal about how these systems actually work, subscribe. Because the pattern of convenient failures and missing evidence extends far beyond one federal prison cell.